discussion and a full presentation by him before he has to go to court. So we'll go ahead and skip introductions as well. I mean, it is one of the advantages of Zoom that you can actually see by scrolling across your screen who's on board. Welcome. Good morning. And it's still a little dark outside and overcast. At least it prevents fires. So that's always a good side of a beautiful overcast day. So Judge Zimmerman, are you ready to proceed? I see on my screen a Clark County Jail population status booking criteria. Is that one of your documents for presentation?
Yes. Just as we used it yesterday, we had about 25 to 30 people. I invited Chris, so he was there to kind of listen in, and we had everybody in law enforcement was involved. We had, I say, with the exception of Camus, I didn't think they were on the bill. We had some issues of 6 or 7 people who couldn't unmute their mic, and all we saw was a phone number. So I'm not sure, maybe they were on there. But we had the representatives from the State Patrol. We had the Center, Ridgefield Battleground through their city attorney. We had the Washougal chief. Rick was representing CCSO along with, I think, one of their commanders or a couple of their commanders. And so we had Greg Harvey for the prosecutor's office. So what we discussed was, which I'll put out later, kind of my 4 bullets before we move forward. We had to figure out what law enforcement agencies are in or not in. If they weren't in, what can we do to get them in? And again, there was nobody who said they were not interested. So that looked very promising to me. But I said the big issue was once an officer, takes somebody to the, let's say, the Crisis Stabilization Center, now renamed and ran by Lifeline, is the Crisis Wellness Center, and they walk away, because that to me was the big gorilla in the room. Who picks them up and which ones they pick up? And that's how we get into this booking sheet, that if they're not going to be booked, so if they're not DV or a DUI, and the jail is not going to, I guess they would book and release them. Rick could elaborate on that. Why even go pick them up? Instead, just send the information to the prosecutor's office, and I guess they summon them later. So, because again, that was the concern of law enforcement. I use the center as an example. If they bring somebody down there and they walk away 2 hours later, the center may only have one person on duty for the whole night. So they probably don't want to have that one person have to go find that person, figure out how many miles or whatever they got away in that time period from the center. So again, this pre-arrest diversion is statutory. And in a second, I'm going to turn it over to Chris because he's the expert on this. Like, he helped write it, that statute. And it's a way of obviously diverting people from the criminal justice system. Also brought out at the meeting, I couldn't get her, maybe Commander Belton couldn't unmute her mic at that time because they kept on asking her to say something, but she was the one who provided sort of volumes of information on what they're doing up in King County in LEAD, whatever that means. It's LEAD, stands for something, but I think it's like a brand type name. You buy that program from somebody and they send people and tell you how to set it up, and they use social workers, which is all great things, but I talk to a lot of officers that I don't see about them waiting at Winco trying to arrest somebody for shoplifting, and they figure out the person has a problem and they got to wait for a social worker to show up. And so I'm not sure all that stuff, how it works. So I guess I'd have to talk, like to say, some people up in King County to see how good it really works. And that could be, as I see in this big True Blood group, is we need little small meetings in groups. We need the police, to check with King County and see how well it works, and the prosecutor to check with King County and see how it works, and then see how they really want to implement it into their particular, police department. Again, this is not something that's required, I would say, for any law enforcement agency to be part of it. But so far, it sounds like everybody, wants to be part of it, or at least wants to hear more about it before they say, yeah, for sure, I'm going to do it. One other thing, I just came up with a suggestion, and I think Crisis Services said they'd be willing to do it, and they could get somebody to the jail for 2 hours, within 2 hours. And I understand Rick's Bishop's concern, but we had 5 prosecutors, I think including Mr. Carney, who's not a prosecutor, but is an attorney, who all agreed there would be authority to do that, to take somebody who walked away to jail. Of course, maybe I keep on saying, we'll get your prosecutor's opinion on that. At least the ones that were there yesterday all agreed that that was something we could do. And I had the state senator on the line too, and she said, if she can quickly get an attorney general's opinion. And Tony, I'd asked Tony, I'm not even sure how he used to be a prosecutor for 10 years, but I don't think that necessarily the prosecutor can ask for attorney general's opinion, or maybe they can't. And so I guess it depends on the police agency that they need to, they're good with their local, prosecutor or local, person who does their stuff, like Christine Haiti. She agreed, and she represents the center battleground in Richfield. If we needed an attorney general's opinion, and Tony couldn't get us one,
Judge,
I have other people to get one. Go ahead, Tony.
Judge, I apologize. I actually have been listening and pay attention, but I missed what is it you're saying that there's a potential need for opinion on again?
Rick Bishop had concern. It's not a crime to walk away from the Crisis Stabilization Center or even the hospitals. It's not just that. They can take them and see this list like Rainier Springs, either of the hospitals, but if they don't stay, you get hooked up with services and then walk away. The agencies go pick them up and maybe take them to jail. And Rick had a question about, what authority do they have to hold them? Well, it's kind of like a delay. You understand, police have probable cause for a felony. Sometimes they don't arrest the guy for 3 months because he isn't doing what he's supposed to do in the area of helping out another drug bias. So I would think if you had probable cause to take someone to jail and you didn't per this statute and they walk away, you have a fellow officer rule or something that allows some agency to go pick them up. Now, the issue is DPD, even though it's in their jurisdiction, probably shouldn't have the onus of picking up everybody from the center, Camas, Richfield, but maybe they will. So you understand the issue. Go ahead, Rick. Tell us what your concern was.
Well, you've got it pretty well laid out. It's a police officer bringing in a person into the jail, not booking them, leaving them in our custody pending a civil evaluation, and for 2 hours or whatever the amount of time is, I'm holding someone without a legal charge. And and Tony, I'll be happy to get with your office and we'll get it worked out what the concerns or non-concerns are.
Yeah, we're happy to give you advice, Rick, on that. We'll definitely take care of that.
Yeah, because we've done all kinds of orders in the past when I was presiding judge. Rick was saying, what would it be? Do they actually have to book them and then they just hold them, and we have a kind of a blanket order that they can be released upon a finding of they meet the criteria for civil commitment. So that was just one additional idea. I think blood folks like that to give one last chance to get these people again, to keep them out of the criminal justice system. So unless someone has questions, the real expert here is Christopher Carney. So I'm going to have him explain that statute and how he thinks it would work. And I would say so far we've had at least 2 meetings. And I would suggest to Chris, we need these little smaller work groups. I'll repeat myself. This is really the call of police departments to work with their, prosecutors, decide what they want to do. It's not a law that they have to do it. As I understand, they can just join in. But every law enforcement agency so far has expressed interest in Clark County. They also can have different standards. So one agency may not want to let in a certain type of crime, and another agency could. But it'd be nice, I think, to have consistency, but it doesn't have to be. So their officers would have some kind of a list and know who they can take to the Crisis Stabilization Center instead of jail and that sort of thing. So Mr. Carney, who again was the lead plaintiff. Go ahead, Gary. What?
Yeah, so I thought you were going to turn it over for further discussion, but I wanted to make one point based on what Tony was asking and Rick also chimed in on. I mean, these are really big, challenging issues to make this work, since most addicts, by their very nature, are completely out of control. They'll walk away from emergency rooms. They'll walk away from crisis stabilization centers. The other second and third order impact that we still, Rick, as far as I know, still haven't solved are, who pays for the booking, and then once in custody, who pays for that? What jurisdiction is on the hook for that? I mean, that complicates our billing cycles with between the jail and the individual police departments, cities. So we still haven't completely cracked that nut on that budgetary issue. So I didn't want to lose sight of that as we think of these complicated issues. How do we keep them in diversion? And then vice, if they walk away, they end up getting picked up by some department and then booked. It becomes a complicated billing issue at the jail. So, Judge, I'm sorry to interrupt, but were you going to turn it over?
Just a second, what I want to add or follow up on your comment there. Most of they may have some what we call co-occurring disorders. They may have some drug problems too, but these people are mental health. This is not a drug court type diversion or with mental health problems. And if they meet the criteria, again, that Chris Carney can explain, then the officer checks with CRESA. In CRESA, we have a tree, maybe Mr. Carney can show. They have a decision tree, so they decide where they go. Do they take them to the hospital, or take them to Rainier Springs? Do they take them to the Crisis Stabilization Center, and things of that nature? But these are mental health deferrals. That doesn't mean one of the persons, couldn't be a little bit high on drugs or something at the time. Just as a little side note, we brought this up yesterday because I have a lot of friends and sources in various places. One of our district court person actually works out at the port, and he was telling me the other night that some lady jumped over the wall of the Crisis Stabilization Center, got a big pipe, and started beating on the port patrol cars there and so forth. So that person may be in jail now, I don't know, but they had to call somebody to respond, so she was not a happy camper. And again, if she was they're all voluntary to go there. And one thing I'll add too, the manager of the center there said on average they have 3 people a day. What I'm trying to get some stats on is how many people may fit this diversion criteria. I don't think it'd be more than 3 people a day, but maybe I'm totally wrong. She said only 7% walk away, so most of them actually do stay. But there could be a different type of person, so to speak, someone who was alleged to have committed criminal activity, maybe more apt to walk away than someone who went there because their parents said you need help. Somebody picked them up, or they took them to the hospital, and the hospital drove them there, etc. So that's what I wanted to pare down. And again, I'll send that out as my 4 bullets that I put out there for questions. What are the numbers? Because DPD was asking, and they may be willing to pick up everybody if it's only 1 a day or 5 a month. We just want to know how many people are going to go there and how many people are going to walk away, and who's going to pick them up when they do walk away. So again, Mr. Carney was present at that, and so was Rick. If there's anything they wanted to add on about yesterday's meeting and what we discussed, I thought it was pretty productive. So Christopher Carney, the lead attorney for the big True Blood multi-million-dollar settlement, is now here to say a few words and answer your questions. Go ahead, Chris.
All right, thanks, Judge. Nice to meet you all. Some of you I've met before, others I haven't. Just by way of context, I'm assuming you all have some familiarity with the True Blood lawsuit. It was the lawsuit over delays in providing competency evaluation and restoration services for people who are waiting in jail for those services. It was filed in 2014, and in late 2018, early 2019, we reached a settlement that involved a lot of projects around the state, some of which are being implemented in the Southwest region right now. You're probably familiar with some of them. In addition, we've been able to fund through contempt fines that the state has paid some ancillary diversion services, trying to get programs stood up, and with the hope that they would come up with sustaining funding going forward. So one of the things that the settlement required the state to do was to advance legislation to try to reduce the number of people who become class members of the True Blood lawsuit. In other words, to divert them out of the criminal justice system before they're sitting in jail waiting to be evaluated or restored to competency. One of the ways we chose to tackle that was by amending the arrest diversion statute. And I think there's a little one-page explainer that might be put up on the screen about that. Did that get to the right people? Okay. So at any rate, the issue with RCW 1031-110, the arrest diversion statute, is that the way it was originally written, it was very restrictive as to the type of offenses that could be diverted. And, oh, great, thank you very much. So the statute comes into play whenever there's reasonable cause to believe a person has committed a crime and suffers from some sort of mental health condition. The way the statute used to be written, very, very few offenses were permitted to be diverted. The list excluded, for example, anything in what the statute in 9A46 described as harassment offenses. And unfortunately, for the old statute, a lot of those offenses are exactly the kinds of issues that we see arise with people in mental health crisis. Criminal trespass was among the listed offenses that were excluded from diversion, for example. So what the legislature ultimately did, the team that I was on helped write a statute to change that so that now local jurisdictions are given the discretion to divert to mental health resources any crime. Now, obviously, we don't expect diversion to mental health resource for serious felonies, but we're giving the local jurisdictions the discretion to figure out their own guidelines. The other thing that the statute does now is it broadens the options that officers have for where to take a person. And you'll see on the one pager that should be up on your screen, a bulleted list there that includes destinations for a person who is in mental health crisis who may have committed a crime on the street. A crisis stabilization unit is a good choice, crisis triage facility, a designated crisis responder for evaluation for civil commitment, and where appropriate, release to a voluntary outpatient treatment. Now, Judge Zimmerman mentioned the LEAD program, and Judge Z, that stands for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. It's a program that started in Seattle and has had some good success. Judge, there's actually a study that I should have sent to you a while back, and I just didn't think of it until now. There's a study that shows some pretty promising success for the program. Basically, what it involves is a person at the point of arrest being diverted instead to contact with a social worker who will do sort of long-term follow-up case management, get the person connected with resources in the community for housing and treatment services. The one study that's been completed that I have shows pretty good long-term results over, I think it was a 2-year follow-up period, fewer contacts with law enforcement, fewer bookings, more success in treatment, more stabilization in housing. So as measured by those outcomes, it is very promising. And so I will make an effort to connect members of this group and others in Clark County and the Southwest region with some information about LEAD, if that's something you guys are interested in. Typically, it is funded by the jurisdictions that are using its services. And so I've got a meeting coming up with their staff to talk about how there might be a fit down here, but it'll be, of course, up to you guys whether you want to follow up on that. At any rate, the statute is worded in such a way that I'm confident legislators were thinking of LEAD when they wrote it, but that doesn't mean LEAD is the only option. There are other mobile crisis co-responder models that have been tried with good success elsewhere. Spokane has a good program, for example, where an officer can do a handoff to a social worker to try to connect the person to appropriate services, and acuity of the person and how deeply in crisis they are will be a factor in deciding what's the appropriate place. Judge, did you want to add something?
No, I appreciate that education there.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
So,
no problem at all.
I can say.
Chris, before you continue on, because I did have a follow-up to what Judge Zimmerman said a moment ago, and I'm wondering if there is any kind of complication with the amendment that was done to the RCW. So when I broadly said addict, I wrongly broadly said addict, but my experience as a prosecutor and judge, and I hate to say it, as a father as well, the two go hand in hand, and I'm hoping that the True Blood settlement and the amendment doesn't exclude drug use and addicts from this diversion. What I found particularly in our very detailed social probation report analysis of anyone I was going to put on probation is a mental health often masks addiction and vice versa. Those with mental health self-medicate with street drugs, and those who are addicts have underlying mental health issues. So there's a good overlap. And we used to call it dual diagnosis. I don't know if that's a common term here in Washington State, but it provides challenges from treatment, obviously, and how you stabilize someone who has both issues. And one masks the other, and it's hard to understand. One isn't exclusive of the other. So I'm wondering between Judge Zimmerman and Chris, whether or not, is there a problem with how we divert in that decision tree with law enforcement? Because, it's a problem set that goes hand in hand. So can someone give me a little bit more detail on whether this amendment?
I mean, this is for people they have to meet the mental health criteria. I mean, the other law enforcement people, they divert a lot of people now. They divert them into drug court who have drug problems, or they divert them into our district court, SAC court. But those people do go through the formal system of being charged, being screened, and the prosecutor is kind of the gatekeeper on some of them. They can actually, completely reject if it's going to be a pre-plea type situation where they're actually going to dismiss the charges. So anyway, those types of things, again, it's kind of the prosecutor's call, and they are in the system. These are the mental health people who are being diverted from the system, taken to one of these various options of the hospital, stabilization center, etc. So they probably don't come to court. I think they would only come to court if we don't get a positive report that they're following up with these agencies and doing what they're supposed to do outside of the court system. Then they get summons back in. I would understand it or think that's how it would have to work. They don't just get off, scot free by showing up one time at the stabilization center and never, hooking up with a counselor, never going for mental health treatment, etc. Tony, I think at one point you said, starting slow is what Harvey said yesterday, but you were willing to maybe have lower level felonies that it works well, come into the court, come into the diversion program. You once said, that the last one.
Yeah, Judge, with respect to this, pre-arrest diversion, I think that, since we're all going into this, I think with our eyes open, that, the Crisis Wellness Center, people are able to walk away. So I think, in any system like this, I think we should, start cautiously. I'm all for this. We've tasked Greg Harvey from our office to work on this, and I think it sounds great. I expect we're going to want to start with misdemeanor offenses, see how it works, see how the capacity is, see how it works out. But I expect that a lot of the cases will probably come from BPD. It'll be the city attorney's office that also needs to weigh in on that, and then the other jurisdictions on misdemeanor cases also. But with respect to county misdemeanor cases, I think this sounds like an excellent option. I certainly would not want to start off with felony cases, but perhaps down the line when there's significant capacity and it's been tested and it works well, then I could see that we would transition into some more serious cases, being low-level felonies. But that's kind of what I would foresee, hopefully.
Yeah, for stat purposes, When I've checked in past years, just the nature of the type of the people, since they get in trouble and come into our therapeutic courts, it was almost like 65% for City of Vancouver. I would think that would probably hold true here. I mean, just the downtown areas where the homeless people might be, and those are prime candidates, I would think. So we'll probably have 65% of misdemeanor referrals. Again, they probably come from the city. And I know city prosecutors, I think, out today, but we have Brenda, who is their grant writer, and she's tracking all this stuff, and she is the one who helped set up the meeting yesterday. Again, going back to what Mr. Carney might want to add, I got to start court in a minute, so I'm kind of new to this the law and justice here, not law and justice per se, but this committee. I was on it maybe 15 years ago, whatever it was with Lucas. But one thing I'm going to throw out here, it's off topic. I was asked from our judges meeting to address an issue, and it may not be as big of an issue if it gets resolved, but we were told, I would say this would be a security type issue, so I think Tony would be interested, everybody else, on the safety possibly of people here in the courthouse. Because I was told that starting January 1, there will be one deputy on Monday and Fridays in the courthouse. So that means Mr. Collier, Superior Court Judge Collier, ties somebody up for 2 hours or an hour or whatever it is in a Superior Court sentencing procedure. In the probation department, as I say, Mr. Farrell has his staff recommending revocation of a deferred process and 6 months in jail. That guy's going to book maybe, or I just have him sit in a jury box for an hour or so. So I'm just saying, we're only going to have one person. Understand, it's the deputies, I call them, I have the name wrong. It's the deputies that we call to take people into custody. I'm talking about transport. So for security purposes, again, in the entire courthouse, I've had civil cases. I've had more small claims people where I've had fights over the years than I have with actual criminals in custody. I've had people spit on each other in small claims. You got to get somebody fast to break up the fight. It doesn't happen obviously every week, but I just want to throw that out there. Maybe Rick at a later time can address it. I've heard it's partially a situation that nobody wants to work 4 5s, and it's how they stagger, the 412s or whatever it is. So again, if we only got one custody officer, I call him custody officer, or safety officer, patrolman doing the whole courthouse, what do you think about that, Judge Collier? Is my last words, and then you guys can go back to Carney. But if that's the case, and that's what I've been told we brought it up at our judges meeting, I was supposed to bring it up here, and I didn't know if the Superior Court had heard about that yet.
I haven't been, this is Jessica, included in those discussions. I know that Judge Collier had a telephone call starting at 8:30 with the governor's office. So he might have removed himself from the meeting.
Okay, I know I've kind of sidetracked this. I was supposed to bring that up from our judges meeting. So whoever's going to have a committee, and I think in the past we've said we're going to talk to the county councilors now and support whatever needs to be supported. I'd rather see no screeners and more deputies if that was the case, because the deputies carry the guns and they can break up the fights whatever, and protect everybody else. But that's just my opinion. So Rick, did I throw a haymaker at you, or did you leave? Maybe he had to step out too.
I'm still here, and I will pass the question on to patrol. I'm unaware of their current deployment.
Oh, okay. Because a lot of people aren't aware of it. Like I say, it just kind of hit me by surprise. And I brought it up, and then like I say, our court administrator said she was going to reach out to the Quay, the sergeant, see what's going on. But I conferred it with all kinds of people in my courtroom. Those officers said, yeah, there's only going to be one officer for the whole courthouse on Monday and Fridays starting January 1. Now, again, it worked. It will work, obviously, during the COVID Zoom time. So I can't imagine that would possibly be safe and work when we get up to full speed. And we're servicing, 13 courts or something like that. Not all of them are doing criminal dockets, but on certain days, there's 3 or 4 that are. So, okay. That's an issue out there for long.
Yeah, Judge, why don't we let take that to the sheriff to discuss internal security of the courthouse, and if we need to address that at some point in this committee, we could, or between the county council if there's a budgetary impact. But was Chris done with his presentation?
No, I can continue. Gary, in response to your question earlier about comorbidities with substance abuse and mental health, this statute is specifically targeted at authorizing officers to divert people for mental health issues. Nothing in the statute, though, limits, changes, or eliminates the authority that officers have always already had to divert people with substance abuse disorders. And I think you're absolutely right. The rate at which people with serious mental health issues have also comorbid substance abuse issues is very high. I've seen estimates of 80%. I wonder sometimes if we got better data from reporting from people in mental health crisis, it might be closer to 100%. So I agree with you 100%. People with serious mental illness do self-medicate. It is an issue. I expect that the majority of the people who are subject to diversion under this statute will also have substance abuse needs. And the hope, long-term at least, is that this mental health diversion statute will connect people with resources that can, on their way out the back door of the receiving facility, connect them with substance abuse treatment as well as mental health stabilization treatment. So I think any plan that's going to work for long-term change and stabilization is going to have to address both. But to your concern, this statute does not eliminate or in any way change existing authority to divert people for substance abuse issues. One of the other changes that the statute made is that when there's probable cause to believe that a person in mental health crisis has committed a crime, there is legal authority to detain for up to 12 hours of observation in an appropriate crisis stabilization unit. And so the objective was to create a continuum of care depending on the level of acuity and the needs of the person. So, you know, in some cases it might be all right to give somebody an hour to calm down and then connect them up with the services that they already had in the community, a counselor or a trusted family member to sort of talk them down and get them back on track. And then people are going to need to be detained for 12 hours and possibly ultimately DCR'd to civil commitment status. And so we're going to have people everywhere in between those 2 points at either end of the continuum. And the statute gives authorization for officers to refer people to appropriate services anywhere on that continuum. Obviously, for that to work, they're going to need to be able to access mental health professionals' advice on where they should go. And I think your crisis stabilization center can be a receiving center for that and help divert people to appropriate levels of care from there. There's been good success around the country with a model of one place that receives a person in a mental health crisis, and trained professionals then will triage them and direct them to the appropriate service. So that's the overall goal here. Obviously, that's going to require time, effort, and investment to build. But I think we can have success in diversion in appropriate cases, like Tony suggested, maybe starting small and finding our way with diverting people to the right options and build on it. So the work group that Judge Zimmerman and I are working with is diverted at what you'll see as the policymaking mandate point here. The new statute requires for local jurisdictions to get together and come up with guidelines to determine who can be diverted and where they can be diverted to. The statute envisions a collaborative process between law enforcement, prosecutors, defense, and the disability community. In some cases, that's going to mean disability advocates like Disability Rights Washington. In a lot of cases, obviously, it'll need to be the local treatment community so that we can have good information sharing about what resources are available, what their capacities are. I have suggested in meetings like this often that it would behoove the jurisdictions working on this to come up with a good point of contact for law enforcement to know in real time, or as close as possible in real time, where there are beds available, where there is capacity within the system, and what what can be used at that moment to divert someone. What we don't want, obviously, is for jurisdictions, especially those with smaller numbers of officers, to have somebody offline driving around for hours trying to find anywhere that will take a person. And so I want to flag for future discussion how we can create a single point of contact for law enforcement to say, hey, what's available right now for this person in crisis? And you in this group and in the other work group will have better ideas of exactly how that should come together in your jurisdiction than I do, but I think that it would behoove you to discuss it.
Chris, we have Brenda on here, and maybe they could pull up that decision tree. Again, it's a rough draft. I think that gives you an idea, obviously working with Cressa and everybody else, I guess, where the people might go. I am going to have to start a docket pretty soon. I also want to indicate we have a local True Blood. Judge Snyder is part of that. And there's a lot of treatment people. It's probably about 20 people. That meets once a month. So if anybody on here is interested, I think we've got representatives already, obviously from the jail and CCSO and the lieutenants from BPD show up. So we got a lot of people to further discuss these issues. So if people, again, want more information, and like I say, for the prosecutor's office, Mr. Harvey attends those. So we're covering a lot of ground. And I was hopeful, again, I think we made a lot of progress yesterday, that we get in smaller groups and get the people who really need to work on one particular problem, rather than keep, addressing these with 40, 50 people at some of these meetings. We can maybe have this up and running in a couple months. I don't know. So that's my pitch. And again, I got to go start a docket. So I appreciate getting a chance to speak here. But before I leave, if someone has a question, anything that you'd ask me, Mr. Carney could probably give a more specific or better answer anyway. So I'm going to have to run to court. Thank you all.
Thanks, Judge.
Sure.
All right, so that is in a nutshell the goal here. We're trying to create a collaborative process to come up with guidelines for officers on the street to be able to easily access the information that they need in order to figure out whether a person is appropriate for diversion and whether or not there are resources available to them at that time. I think there was a one-pager that Vancouver PD was working on for Decision Tree. If anyone could put that up on the screen, we could just take a quick look at it. I can see you're working on it, Tina. Thank you. Chief McIlvaine was kind enough to share with us on the arrest diversion work group side something that he has drafted up, and I think he would want me to emphasize that this is a work in progress, a draft, not final. But it's sort of a decision tree flow chart for an officer to use in the field if they have a call for service with a person in a mental health crisis or who has a mental health disorder. First, assessing whether there's probable cause to believe that a crime had been committed. If yes, then the next question is whether it is on the list of criteria for whether it qualifies for diversion, or whether the community has come together and decided that this one is too serious to be diverted at this stage and it needs to proceed through the booking process. And Tina, if you could scroll down from there. There we go. Thank you very much. Then if yes, it's a qualifying crime, then the officer has discretion to determine whether they should be booked into jail or cited and released as appropriate, or in an appropriate circumstance, diverted to a crisis response placement of some kind. We'll have to fill in local resources to determine exactly what that looks like. And then on the other side of the tree, you'll see whether if there was no probable cause for a crime, then there's a consideration of whether there's a mental health hold, at which point a person would be transported to a hospital or contacted with a DCR. If there is no need for a mental health hold, then consider a mobile crisis response for voluntary services, and that could, in those circumstances, result again in voluntary transport to the hospital or voluntary transport to a crisis wellness center. So I think you'll probably already be seeing, as we look at this diversion tree, there are a lot of criteria and definitions that remain to be filled in. We're going to have to figure out what is our list of qualifying offenses and what is in and what is out for diversion. And we will, I think, need to talk a little bit about how the officer's discretion can be guided. The objective here, though, is that the officer needs to be able to make this decision in real time fairly quickly. And if we can simplify and streamline the decision-making process, that'll help our officers quite a bit. Because again, we don't want to have to take anyone offline for 2 or 3 hours while they make a dozen phone calls trying to figure out what to do with this call. The objective is to be able to clear the officers as quickly as possible and get the person, if they're appropriate for diversion, into the hands of a community treatment provider as quickly as possible. So that's the draft in progress of the decision tree. We'll be discussing that further in the arrest diversion work group, I believe next week. So, look for this to change and for more to be filled in. And I'm sure Judge Zimmerman will make sure that this group is kept apprised. So I covered a lot of ground in a pretty short period of time. Happy to take any questions or suggestions, or if there's any other way I can help today, please let me know.
So thanks for that, Chris. This is a good overview. What I'm confronted with is whether I don't want to duplicate anything that's happening in your diversion meetings. And obviously, a lot of these issues really fall on the PA to work out with the chiefs and the sheriffs. So, as a way ahead for this group, I'm not sure what we want to follow up on. I like the idea of getting a presentation on the LEAD program to see if there's anything there that we should model. I mean, I would like Clark County, of course, to be a model and get something going right away. The issue on the single point of contact, it kind of brings up a single dispatch program, and I'm not sure if this committee as well should address that. I mean, I'd like to hear from, just in the mental health world, in the hospital world, trying to find available bed space in the hospital setting often takes hours to find out, well, where do they go from the emergency room? What's the next available bed space? So I'm not sure what that would look like and who is the best to address that issue. So any comments on that as far as a follow-up for Law and Justice?
Tony's got his hand up.
Gary, I agree with your comment. It would be nice to get a presentation for this group on the LEAD program. I've heard both Dan Satterberg, King County prosecutor, speak positively about LEAD, and also John Tunheim, the Thurston County prosecutor, has spoken positively about LEAD. So, I know that, they've been using that program. It is law enforcement assisted diversion. So that I think law enforcement's primary on it. But I agree. I think that would be good to get a presentation for this group on LEAD. I think that'd be something we should look at.
Yeah, I'm hearing that loud and clear. So I reached out yesterday to the deputy director of the organization that runs LEAD. They are interested. So I'm going to have a call with him and sort of describe where we stand right now, what we know and what we don't know. And I'm sure that he will be happy to make a presentation of some kind. Maybe I can talk to members of this group and give him a little bit more information about exactly what the questions will be. But I know that they'd be interested in working with you guys. So I will try to facilitate that as quick as possible and make sure everyone on this group knows when it's going to happen.
Okay, thanks for that, Kristen. So maybe we can add it to a future agenda for a presentation. And then as far as the details on how do we identify resources, available bed space, we'll leave that to the pre-diversion working group. And I missed yesterday's meeting, but I'll try to sit in on that. And then we'll look for a further presentation down the road as this decision matrix, this decision tree gets a little bit more detail to it. I think that's would be great for an update for our law and justice. If there's nothing else, I did want to move on to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Is there any further comment on the True Blood topic for now, though, before we move on? Okay, hearing none. Is there any objection to approve the minutes from the last meeting? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and approve it. And then, Rick, were you going to give us an update on behalf of the sheriff? I see that Chief McIlvaine, and we don't seem to have any other chiefs on board. I'm still wondering whether or not we're doing this meeting too early in the morning and we're not allowing for everyone's schedule. But in any case, Rick, are you presenting for where we're at on the body cam progress with the law enforcement?
I have a short comment from the undersheriff that we are still studying different vendors, and we are currently deploying one system in the field right now, and they'll have some more updates, but this is a long process, and we are trying to make sure we're thorough on this subject, sir.
Okay, and I wanted to raise, because we just, and go ahead, Tony.
Thanks, Gary. I apologize. Just wanted to ask Rick, you said that they're actually doing a test deployment of a system currently?
That is what I have as the update from the undersheriff, sir, yes.
Okay, but thank you.
Thank you.
So I would note that as the county council, we had a presentation that there was a grant that was approved, and it's to be shared by Vancouver Police Department and the county for law enforcement. It was a very small amount. It was about $88,000 between the two jurisdictions. The question I sent back was, why was the grant so small? And boy, if we could get a much bigger grant, maybe we could help fund some of this body cam initiative between all of the law enforcement agencies, if we can bring them all on board to head in the same direction. So I'm hoping we can find some grants. I think it's pretty much dead at Congress as far as seeing some body cam money in any of the law enforcement reform bills. You know, I really have no optimistic outlook right now for our own legislature once they finally get into session to be able to tackle any issues that may bring us funding. So that will remain a challenge once you do bring a specific vendor proposal as a new budget package. So thanks for that, Rick. It sounds like we don't have. Is there any other discussion we can head into with this group than this morning, waiting pretty much? Well, let me ask this, Rick, do you have a sense when this was brought up with the other chiefs throughout the county, are people falling in line? Do they want to follow the sheriff's lead on this? Is everyone just worried about how much it's going to cost and kind of sitting back?
There's a lot of conversation going on. I don't think I can characterize it and do it any justice, so I'll get it for you, sir.
Okay. Well, not wanting to prolong this unnecessarily, is there any further discussion on a meeting at a different time? Because I really would like to get more participation, to have more robust, not only discussion, but having people exposed to the topics that we're discussing. I mean, I see this as a brain trust. Again, if we want to be a model and get something moving forward, I think this body can help do that in different circles, from prosecution to city prosecution to the chiefs. So I know the sheriff really supported having it at this time. Is there any inertia to pick a different time? Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so we'll keep it at this time for the time being. Well, if there's anything else for the good of the order, otherwise, we'll see if we can get further follow-up on the body cam issue next meeting, as well as perhaps a presentation on the LEAD program, which, at least as described to me, sounds like it may have some real good areas of interest for us to try to adopt or take forward ourselves. Anything? All right, well, we'll go ahead and thank everyone for their attendance this morning. And Tina, thanks for the support with the slides. That went pretty well. We'll see you all next time, hope eventually, maybe even in person.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, everyone.